Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Yá'át'ééh binne. Hello, this is Mark Charles. Today is Friday, August 22nd, and I'm sitting here with my second cup of coffee. And I want to talk to you about what's been going on in DC. If you haven't heard, we have become a federal police state. President Trump has decided that he wanted to take over the DC policing, and he has deployed national guards throughout the city. Several states have sent many of their national guards here in support of Trump to try to kiss his um, ring. And yeah, it's become kind of a mess. And so I wanted to just talk with you about that a little bit today because there's a few things we need to clarify that I want to go into. And one is that the DC which you see on the news is not necessarily, actually is not even close to the DC that most of us live in here in Washington, DC. And I want to talk some about that. I want to talk about how what the federal government is doing is really, it's nothing shocking or new or even different. It's just more of the same. This is what the US government does when it feels afraid and when it sees people who are not white gain political power and access. And so I want to talk about some of that to you and just put some of what you hear and see going on here in the District of Columbia in perspective and talk about it in a bit more of a historical context. But before I do, I want to do like I always begin my podcast, which is acknowledge I'm speaking to you from what's now called Washington, D.C., but these are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the hosts of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank the Piscataway for their stewardship of these lands. And I want to just state and remind myself and all of us how humbling it is to be living, breathing, moving, earning a living, existing on these lands today, knowing that lands, not just here in DC, but all throughout Turtle Island, are indigenous lands who have indigenous hosts who were here long before Columbus got lost at sea. So my Piscataway relatives, thank you for your stewardship of these lands. It is a humbling honor to be here today. So, yes, there's a lot we have to talk about. I welcome you to grab a cup of your favorite morning beverage. Mine is coffee, and I want to just talk about some of what's going on. So, let me start just by showing you a few pictures and a few graphics. The other day, I was out with my friend, Leroy Barber. He was visiting here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we were just taking a walk out towards the Capitol, not too far from where I live. And as we walked past Union Station, we noticed, like we had heard, that there were National Guard deployed all throughout the city. And I hadn't seen much of them prior to that, but when we looked walking towards the Capitol, we saw an increasing presence. And on the Capitol, there were definitely a lot of both vehicles as well as National Guard sitting there guarding the Capitol and just deployed and making their presence known throughout the city. And you've heard about this, right? We've talked about it. It's been a part of the national dialogue for a couple of weeks now. But I want to just give you a bit of perspective, not only as someone who has been living in the District of Columbia for the past 10 years, but also someone who grew up near and lived just prior to moving here on the Navajo Reservation, on an American Indian reservation. And there's actually a lot of similarities between the District of Columbia and Native reservations, Indian reservations. And I want to talk some about those and what those similarities are and why what we're seeing today in the District of Columbia is just more of the same and not in the least bit shocking when you understand how this country was founded and when you understand how the US government operates. So, yeah, let me get into some of those discussions. If you've heard me talk before about the life living on Indian reservation, and before I begin, let me just say, Yá'át'ééh, Shantina, thanks for joining. There's other people who are on. Thank you for joining this morning. I'm grateful you are choosing to spend some time this morning sharing a cup of coffee with me. But you've heard me talk before about what it was like to live on the Navajo Nation. I lived there for 11 years with my family. I grew up right off of the Navajo Reservation in a border town called Gallup, New Mexico. And when we moved there, when we moved onto the reservation, we actually lived in a very remote part of our reservation. We were 6 miles off the nearest paved road. We lived on a dirt road. The community we lived in had no running water. There was no electricity. We lived in a traditional hogan. And we were completely prepared to be off the grid. We knew we were going to have to haul our water and use an outhouse, and there were going to be sheep and goats and cows around our neighborhood, and shepherds and rug weavers, and right, we expected that. We expected to be cooking by candlelight and to be living off the grid. But what felt the most shocking when we moved there was not the way we were off the grid, but how it felt like we kind of dropped off the face of the earth. I could literally count on one hand the number of non-native people who were not immediate family who came to visit us in those first couple of years living on the reservation. And even in the whole 11 years we were there, the pattern we noticed is that primarily the only non-native people we ever saw coming to the reservation were those who came to take our picture, those who came to give us charity. No one was really interested in building a relationship, and they all kind of had their own agenda, whether it was to learn something or to see something or to reinforce a stereotype they had. And there was very little interest in getting to know us as people. And that's actually not that dissimilar from living here in Washington, D.C. So many people. I love D.C. because so many people come through the District of Columbia. It's a hub, not just nationally, but even globally. There's conferences here. There's government offices here. There's embassies here, right? It's a global hub. And so many people come through D.C. And yet most of them just spend their time on Capitol Hill or around the White House or downtown or in Northeast, which is where Georgetown is. And very few people come into the neighborhood where I live or into other parts of the district that are much different from the DC you see on television. DC is the white population is a minority population in DC. There is no population that has over 50%, but the Black population is by far the largest, I think, with 43% of the population. Latinx and others make up another majority of the population, and whites are in the 39% of our population. But when you come to the DC that you see on TV, unless they're showing crime, then you primarily just see the white neighborhoods, where the white people, the rich people, the people who come to work government jobs or come to save the world, where those people live. And rarely do you see the district that the rest of us live in. And so while there's a lot more people who come through and visit the district, you still have this same sense of you're invisible to the outside world, much like we felt when we were living on the Navajo Reservation. Another similarity between the two, right? Navajo Reservation obviously is a majority Navajo. It's a majority Native peoples. And our leadership, right? We're not just a reservation, we're a nation, the Navajo Nation. We have our own president, we have our own council, we have our own police force, we have our own court system, we have our own governance of our lands. And all of that is Navajo people. But again, because this nation was founded on a doctrine of discovery that held the belief and the theological position that natives are savages and not fully human, and therefore they could discover our lands and take them from us and even ethnically cleanse and commit genocide against us. Right? Because of that history, I often would tell people and do tell people that, yeah, the idea that we are somehow sovereign over our lands or have agency for ourselves is a misnomer. We're sovereign over our lands like your teenage child is sovereign over their bedroom. where they can put a sign on the door that says "Keep out," but it's your house, and you can control what goes on in the house. And that's the same for many, many Native peoples. We don't actually own our reservations. Our reservations are trust lands held in trust for us by the U.S. government. And so, and even people talk about the case with McGirt a few years ago, where this was a Supreme Court case really reaffirming Native sovereignty and treaties. And in some sense, it was. But if you understand Indian law and just the way law works on Indian country, on reservations, the whole reason that case was even a thing was because in American Indian law, and I use the word American Indian when I talk about the government because that's how we're officially referred to by the government. They still call us Indians in their misguided way of understanding things. But when a Native person commits a crime against another Native person on a reservation, the jurisdiction for that crime falls to the federal courts, because it's the federal government that ultimately has the authority over our lands and over our people. And so when you live on an Indian reservation, you just get used to dealing with the federal government on a much more consistent basis because they're the ones that have the authority on those lands. And that's just the way things work there. And right, this is true, not just on our reservation. I want to give you a few examples. If you remember the Dakota Access Pipeline and those protests that were going on, right, where thousands of Native peoples from hundreds of Native nations from all around the country came to protest what was happening with the water and with the pipeline going through some of the reservations in that part of the country. And we were protesting. We were committed to the teachings of our elders. We were committed to processes of prayer and of ceremony. We were committed to nonviolence. And yet, of course, anytime the U.S. government sees this number of non-white people gathering, they began getting incredibly nervous, especially if those gatherings are Native American or Black, because those were the first two demographics that were originally oppressed by this country. African people were kidnapped from Africa, brought here, and enslaved. Native peoples were referred to as savages, and our lands were discovered, and they committed ethnic cleansing and genocide against us. And so, right, we have this paranoia now that our government has whenever Black or Native people begin to gather, because there's immediately thought of, are they going to somehow rebel or somehow try to fight back against what we did to them? And so the response is almost always a military response, right? Whether it's National Guard, whether it's the actual military, there's almost always a militaristic and armed response to gatherings from both Black and Native gatherings, because there's a tremendous amount of fear that we might do to them what they did to us. And you just get used to this. Even during COVID, I remember I looked up this story this morning because I remembered it very clearly. Even during COVID, there was an outbreak of COVID on the Navajo Nation, just like it was going all around the country. In Gallup, New Mexico, which is the border town I lived in, I grew up in, right off of the Navajo Nation. I'm going to share this article with you. right here that you can read. So this was like May 1st of 2020. There was an outbreak of COVID, and the rates of COVID were getting high. And so the governor of California used the Riot Control Act to deploy National Guard and state police to basically shut down roads leading into Gallup. Now, if you look at the map, if you look at the article I just shared with you, it gives the list of road closings that they were closing. And the majority of the roads they were closing were roads that didn't allow people coming on the interstate from other states and other parts of the country to get off in Gallup. Those exits were still good. No, the exits they closed were the exits that were used primarily by Native peoples coming off of either the Navajo Nation or the Pueblos, which are south of Gallup, and also the Hopi Reservation, which is north of Gallup. And those were the primary exits they were closing, and they were policing, and they were trying to prevent Native peoples from coming into Gallup. White people coming from other parts of the country could get off on different exits, and they could easily get in, and they weren't being stopped near as much. But our people, were being prevented, basically forced to stay on our reservation and not go into Gallup, where much of our shopping was done, where much of our commerce was done. And we were being prevented from going into Gallup by the National Guard, by the state police. And again, it was a riot control act that was enacted to basically keep us from coming into Gallup. And just for reference, Gallup is one of the cities that was established after Abraham Lincoln ethnically cleansed the Southwest through the Long Walk so that the railway, which runs directly through Gallup, could be built. And so, yeah, this town and this community started in ethnic cleansing and genocide. So in a way to both remove and control the Native population in that area. And so this is just the history. So when I heard about what was going to be happening in DC and how they were deploying Trump, what I heard, what happened, what I read happened is one of his Doge staffers was carjacked, and Trump got news of that and decided there was enough of that kind of violence going on, and so he was going to take control of the city. And he used that as an excuse to take control of the city, and basically tried to set up his own leaders of the police force in the city. That was challenged in court. I think he's backed down from that, but he still deployed the National Guard, which he has control over. And so they are now deployed throughout our city. And then I just read in an article yesterday, I don't have this to share with you, but there's another article, I think it was in the Washington Post, where ICE agents are now accompanying DC police, especially when they're stopping people who are driving mopeds, who are mostly Latinx and have been shipped here by the governors of Florida and Texas, because we're a sanctuary city. And so they've been flying and busing undocumented immigrants into DC. And many of these immigrants and people are working as Uber Eats and, the food delivery people driving their mopeds. And so as the DC police are stopping them, then ICE is using that as an opportunity to check their immigration status and arrest them if anything is found. And so that is also beginning to happen in DC, which is unfortunately a whole nother topic that we can discuss at another point. But it's really fast. So on one hand, much of what's been going on feels like, this is just what it was like to live on the Navajo Nation, and where, as a citizen of the Navajo Nation, right, we have our own president, we have our own courts, we have our own police force, we have our own council, but the government, the U.S. government, is what ultimately has authority or control over our land, and not us. And it's not that dissimilar here. Congress is, I believe, like 73% white, and also very, very male. I forget the exact percentage. I actually have them here. Let me pull these up. So if you look at the breakdown of Congress by race, this is by race. The lighter colors in both the House and the Senate is the number of white people, and then the minorities are on the sides. And so, most of the leadership of our Congress is white. And also, most of the leadership of our Congress is male, with the majority, 29% of our Congress being female and the other 71% being male. And again, so we have a federal government that is majority white and majority male. And I just looked up these numbers the other day. In the district, our city governance, our elected officials are majority female and majority black, which represents the pretty close the demographics of the city. And so it, again, is no shock that the government, the US government, whenever they feel threatened, will have no qualms about taking over the city, because they do not even acknowledge the full humanity of the people who are in leadership positions in this city, right? This nation was founded on the belief that African people and Native peoples were not fully human, which is why we could be enslaved and our lands could be taken and our lands could be discovered and ethnically cleansed and all these things, because we weren't seen as equal or as human like white people were. And so whenever the country gets scared, they just go back to how this nation was founded and to those same beliefs. And and it's not just the Republicans, right? Do not just blame this on Trump. It was also President Biden in 2022, I think it was, who promised when he ran for office that he was going to allow the district to govern itself. And we don't actually get to govern ourselves. We can pass laws. We have a city council. We have a mayor. But the U.S. Congress has the ultimate say in whether or not our laws are approved and passed. And there was one law we had about our policing that we had passed as a council. It was a controversial law, and even the mayor was opposed to it, but it was overridden by our council. And Congress said, no, we don't trust the council, and so we're not going to let them pass that law. So they overruled it, they overturned it, and vetoed it. And Joe Biden, who promised when he ran for office that he would not interfere and would not veto our laws that we were passing as a district, supported the actions of the Congress and approved the bill that overturned our law. And so don't act like this is just a Republican problem, because it's not. This is what both sides do whenever they feel afraid. This is what white landowning men do whenever they feel afraid, and that fear is coming from Black or Native populations. And so this is not a partisan problem. This is very much a problem on both sides. And I think I just lost my camera here a moment. So let me go back and double check what happened here. Give me just a second. There we go. Sorry about that. So anyway, yeah, what's going on in DC is just more of the same. This is just what our country does whenever it gets afraid. It goes back to how it was founded, which is that white men are central. The rest of us are on the periphery. The Constitution wasn't written to give us rights or to give us agency. We weren't seen as equal. White people believed they were superior. And whenever the country gets afraid, they just revert back to that. That's what the nation does. And so it's not surprising that living in the District of Columbia feels very, very similar to living on the Navajo Nation, on an Indian reservation, because we are not respected. We are not seen as equal. We are not seen as human. Even in regards to voting, right? I talked about this when I lived on the reservation. The Navajo Nation, 26,000 square miles. If we were a state, we'd be the 40th largest state, bigger than 10 other states. 250,000 people, Native peoples living on our reservation. And yet we don't control an entire congressional district on our reservation. Because we're in the Four Corners area, we have lands in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. There is not a single full congressional district within the boundaries of our reservation, which means we can't vote even cohesively as a nation for representation in Congress or for even who we want to be our president. Not Navajo Nation president, but US president. Right? And we're massive compared to most reservations. And this is just another way the US government works to diminish the voice of Native peoples. Right? The District of Columbia, again, majority people of color. Of that demographic, the majority of those people are Black. We vote probably 95% Democrat as a district. So the Republicans are absolutely opposed to DC statehood. And the Democrats aren't ever willing to push that through when they have a majority. And so, yeah, we have a single vote in the Electoral College, but we have no vote in Congress. We have no representation in Congress, no one who can vote. We have a single member who is a non-voting member of the US Congress. So whenever you hear people say, call your Congress member and talk to them about, we can't do that. We have no member of Congress who has a voice there, a vote there, who can represent us as a group of people, which is very similar to what happens on Native nations. We are, even our nation, the Navajo Nation, the largest nation in the country, does not control a single congressional district, which makes it harder for us to voice ourselves and our thoughts in the federal government. And so this is the challenge that we face. And it's just more of the same. But what I want to talk to you about today, what I wanted to discuss today, was a dynamic I saw when I went down to the Capitol this past weekend. If you look closely at that picture, you can see there's some of the National Guard pictured in that photo. Other pictures I took, and as we walked through, we saw many National Guard members standing. And I noticed that the majority of those National Guard members were Black, and all of them were people of color. And I actually went up to one group and I said, hey, I'd like to ask a question. And they said, sure. I said, was it intentional that only people of color were deployed to this very public space, or did that happen some other way? And we were having a civil conversation. I wasn't confronting them. I was literally trying to understand, because it was striking to me that all of the National Guard members there were people of color, and the majority of them were Black. And they reminded me that this was the DC National Guard, which is comprised of citizens from the district, which again is a majority Black. And so it would make sense that the majority of our National Guard would be people of color and Black. And they reminded me of them, oh yeah, that's right, you're correct. It was a good conversation. I appreciated them. I thank them for that. There were also some other people protesting, and the people who were protesting were just there, weren't doing anything. They had some booths up and they were just kind of there. But then when we walked back about 2 hours later, hour and a half later, it was becoming dark. And the protesters were now picketing, and they had their kind of microphones, and they were literally standing in front of the National Guard people, screaming at them, cursing at Trump, screaming for them to get out of the district and to not be a part of this mess. And again, what really struck me was all of the National Guard members were people of color from the district. And I went up and asked some of the protesters between their screams, and most of the protesters were white. And at least half of them that I spoke to were not from the district. And I just said to them, I said, you know that the people you're screaming at right now, and I said, not that I disagree with your protests. I think Trump is absolutely doing something that is not ethical. It's not even constitutional, and it needs to be challenged. But you're screaming at people who are from the district, and you're not even from the district, and they're people of color, and you're white. And you're screaming and cursing at these people. I'm like, this seems counterproductive. What are you hoping to accomplish? And to me, I think that's the complexity of this that makes living in the district, not just coming here to save the world or to protest or lobby your favorite politician, but when you actually live here and get to know the people here, you recognize how dysfunctional this whole place is. And even the people who might be coming for valid reasons, right? They're protesting things that need to be protested. But they're often screaming at and overlooking and not even acknowledging the humanity of the people who are standing in front of them. And no one, right? This is the challenge. And I walked back from that evening in a deep place of reflection. Right? This is the challenge that we have, not only as a nation with a history as vile and dehumanizing as ours is, but because our political discourse from both sides of the aisle is merely now just protesting, lobbying, screaming, and obstructing. We have lost the ability to connect at a human level with people who we see as opponents. And we don't know how to do these things and have these discussions in a humane way that acknowledges the agency and the humanity of everybody involved. One of the things I've started doing, I don't know if I've said this before or not, one of the ways I pray on a regular basis. And I've wrestled with how do I pray for the leadership of this nation, especially for Donald Trump. And I pray three things for Trump on a regular basis. I pray that Creator will humble him. I pray that Creator will decenter him. And I pray that Creator will heal him. I pray that for his humbling, because first of all, that's a value that I hold high, to walk in humility, to conduct yourself with humility. And Trump is conducting himself arrogantly, narcissistically. And I think it's important that he be humble, not mistreated, not degraded, but humble. The same thing with decentered, right? I can't diagnose Trump from a distance, but he displays many of the characteristics of someone who has the narcissistic personality disorder, which puts himself at the center of so many things. And Trump is at the center of everything right now. And I think it would be helpful for him, not only the well-being of the nation, but for his own well-being, to be decentered and recognize he's not the middle of everything. And third, I pray for his healing, because he clearly is a very broken, unhappy man. Does not have very many friends, is constantly talking about retribution, and doesn't know how. He clearly is a very broken man. And I pray for his healing. And I pray these things because I want change, but I don't want to just pray that bad things will happen to him. But I also want to continue, even as opposed as I am and as of damaging I see his policies and his behavior and his attitude being, I still want to and need to remember his humanity at all times. Just like I need to remember the humanity of, and that's what makes these things so complex, right? This struggle becomes so much easier, or clear, I might say, if you just dehumanize the people you're opposed to, and you scream at them without thinking, or you talk with them without looking, or you scream without listening. The much harder solution, harder way to go about this, is to have the discussion in a way that acknowledges everybody's humanity, and to treat others with basic human courtesy and respect and dignity. And that's what I want to encourage all of you to do. Again, there are many things that, whether, I don't care which side of the aisle you're on, there's many things the Democrats are doing that need to be protested. There's many things the Republicans are doing that need to be protested. I'm not saying don't protest. I'm saying, can you find a way to do it? Can you find a way to protest that doesn't degrade, demean, devalue, or dehumanize, or screaming over the humanity of the people who are in front of you? Because that's ultimately what we're fighting for, right? At least that's what I want. I want to live in a nation where we the people actually means all the people. I want to live in a nation where the humanity of everybody is both respected and acknowledged. And we're not going to get there by simply dehumanizing the people who might be opposed to us. And so my encouragement to you, my relatives, it's not that you shouldn't protest. So I want to challenge you to find a way to do it that doesn't reduce or break your integrity for the very thing that you're fighting for, which is to be heard, to be seen, and to be respected and acknowledged. My relatives, I appreciate all of you. There's a few things I want to talk about regarding my upcoming schedule. This next week on Tuesday, August 26th, I'm going to be giving an event of my creation story, my Christian nationalism creation story in Corn, my Common Memory Tour event. It's going to be here in DC at 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Tuesday, August 26th. I will be at the Christ City Church offices on H Street here in Washington, D.C. This is an open event. It's open to the public. I invite you to come if you would like to come. It will last for about, I'm hoping to speak for about an hour and a half and save about 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. I'm very excited about this event. I'm hoping to be able to record it. I won't be able to live stream it, but I'm hoping to record it so that I can share it later with people who can't be there in person. I'm going to work very hard to get both a good audio and a video recording of this event. So if you're in the district this week or next week, I invite you to come and hear me speak, giving my Common Memory tour talk, which is Christian Nationalism, Creation Stories, and Corn. I also want to remind you, if you want to learn more about my Common Memory tour that I'm doing, and you want to help support that, you can do that on my GoFundMe site. I'm going to put that link into the chat right now, and you can find that there. I'm also going to direct you to my Patreon, which is a great place to go if you want to help keep my voice independent. I do not monetize the majority of my social media. I don't sell ads on YouTube. I don't monetize things on Instagram or X or Facebook or anything else. But I do have a site on Patreon, which you can subscribe to. I try to work very hard to take the conversation deeper there. In fact, this coming Sunday, we're going to have my monthly Q&A, which you can join as part of the Ask Questions tier. But if you follow me on Patreon and you subscribe to me there, it's a great way to help keep my voice independent and allow me to make the observations I'm making without having to worry about institutional funding or advertising or things like that. And so that's another great way to do it. The third way is if you want to buy copies of the book I co-authored, Unsettling Truths, which talks about the history that I reference so repetitively when I talk about the doctrine of discovery. You can buy signed copies of my book from my website. So those are all ways that you can work to help keep my voice independent. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, my podcast to get updates about when I go on live. And you can also leave a review for my podcast wherever you happen to get it, whether it's an Apple Podcast or Spotify or the other places you might be listening to it. But I appreciate all of you, my relatives. Thank you for joining me. I hope that your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. And walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together.